Alright, so I checked out Spider-Man Brand New Day last night and I'm super keen to give you my fresh review for it right now. Safe to say that this was my most anticipated movie of this year, surpassing things like Avengers Doomsday, Dune Part 3, and a large range of other blockbusters that have popped up in 2026 and that are coming out. Spider-Man, for me, it's just such an iconic character. We've got Marvel Studios kind of on the ropes at the moment in terms of what they're doing with the MCU, needing to prove themselves once again. So Spider-Man Brand New Day, did it live up to the hype? Did it meet the expectations? And did it put the MCU back on track coming up to Avengers Doomsday later this year? Let's find out right now in my review. So I was a bit of a skeptic going into Spider-Man Brand New Day. The reason being is that I felt this movie had a lot of different tasks to juggle. And we've seen twice now in two separate Spider-Man franchises what happens when a Spider-Man film puts in too many ideas and ultimately it doesn't get around through the runtime and the story writing to handle each idea. Namely in Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where we just had too many ideas come together and the film couldn't quite work its way through them properly. In Spider-Man Brand New Day, I was a little bit worried that they would have the same issue. We've got a lot of different characters and things popping up in the film, a lot of storylines that this movie has to tie together and get right coming into the broader MCU going forward. We obviously had characters that we already know about appearing, like Hulk, Punisher, we have the Hand, we have some other Spider-Man villains who I was very excited to see in this film for the first time. However, ultimately, because of the previous experience that I've had with films where it's trying to put a lot into one bucket, I was a little bit nervous going into Spider-Man Brand New Day. So I am straight off the bat pleased to announce that the film actually does a reasonable job of not cramming the storyline with too many different plot threads. They work a lot of these characters into the storyline organically, and a lot of what they do with the plot feels organic and not necessarily forced, which is definitely a plus going into the film. The film primarily follows Peter Parker, obviously, after Spider-Man No Way Home. A lot of people who Spider-Man cares about have now forgotten who he is. So they don't have any recollection of Peter being Spider-Man, they don't have any recollection of their experiences with Peter, and there's some big emotional moments in the film as Peter works his way through this, and that's the crux of the Spider-Man story in the movie. But we do have some other elements which will interconnect into the MCU in other ways. We've got other characters in the film such as Punisher, we've got Hulk, we've got some other things going on here which definitely kind of take away a little bit from the Spider-Man story. Now, some of this I did appreciate, and some of it I felt like took too much away from the Peter Parker Spider-Man story. So I'm not going to get into any spoilers in this section of the review. There are a couple things that I want to talk about later on in the review, but I will give more than enough warning for anyone to click off if you haven't seen the film yet. However, at this point in time, I'm just going to be discussing things that we know from the trailers, marketing material, and basic things like that. So going into some of those other MCU elements in the film, we have the Punisher being reprised again. John absolutely smashes it as his performance as the Punisher again. Super, super fun character in the movie. I really enjoyed what they did with his character. I enjoyed the length of time he was in the film as well. He's actually in the movie quite a bit, however, he just doesn't feel like he overstays his welcome. There's just some charm about Frank Castle and the way that he's written and both portrayed in the MCU franchise, which just makes him really enjoyable to have on the screen. Not only is he quippy, so he actually does suit the Spider-Man world building when you've got Peter Parker making quips, which he does do in this film, which is great. But we also have him bouncing to and from the Punisher in scenes in the film, which is great as well. Bruce Banner as the Hulk, once again, I feel like they found a way to merge him into the storyline of the film, which felt organic. I don't feel like it was forced. I think that Bruce actually served a purpose for Peter in the story and the overall plot at hand and some things that happened down the line. So I've got to give the movie props for finding an organic way to incorporate his character. Mark Ruffalo's back again doing his thing. Once again, I mean, he doesn't really do anything which we haven't seen before. However, it's more so just the fact that, yes, Hulk is in the movie. Yes, it does connect it to the MCU with Hulk and Spider-Man being on screen together. However, it doesn't feel forced in the way that it comes across. Going on to Ned and MJ now. There's some really good moments here with MJ and Peter in this film as well. There's some really hard-hitting emotional moments, and I actually really enjoy the way that they wrote MJ and the way that they found the way to have Peter communicate with her in a way which is both true to the Peter Parker character and a way which would be true to the MJ character after the events at the end of No Way Home. So I think they did a great job with their relationship. They found a way to have them on screen at the same time without it being forced. Once again, you're going to hear me use that word a few times because we've seen in these MCU properties where they force things to happen on screen. Once again, I want to make it clear that Peter and MJ in the movie, they found a way to have them together for a large portion of the movie without it feeling like it's out of place. So I've got to give them props for that. There's some good moments between the two, which you'll enjoy. Similarly, Peter Parker and Ned, I don't think that we get as much of Ned in this movie as I probably would have liked. However, maybe it's best that he did take a back seat considering how much we're focusing on other characters. And I think that a lot of Ned Leeds' role in the previous movies was taken by the Punisher, actually, in this movie, in terms of being close to Peter, being that support for Peter, and bouncing off jokingly with Peter throughout the movie as well. That said, we do unfortunately get a few characters in the movie which I would have loved to have seen more of, which I can't help but think that were just put in for marketing material and toys and things of that nature, and cameos and that for comic fans, which is great and everything. However, I just think that there's a few villains in this movie that we were promised in marketing and promotional material and things of that nature that ultimately I feel like these shots were added in for the trailer and they weren't actually respected by the creators when they were putting them in the movie. It just felt too quick. I thought that it would have been nice to have gotten some fleshing out of some of their characters and that sort of thing, but yeah, it just was a very quick flash in the pan thing. So that's probably my downside when it comes to the characters that I will talk about in this section of the review in this movie. Sadie Sink is playing a character as well. Who she's playing won't be discussed in this portion of the review. I will say I think that Sadie Sink's performance is fine. I'm not a big fan of Sadie Sink's character. That's probably my main issue with this movie, without going into anything. I just think that Sadie Sink's character in the film unfortunately takes away from Peter Parker's story. It would have been nice to have had Peter Parker's story be the central theme throughout the entirety of the runtime of the movie. I think that Sadie Sink's character partially takes away from that, which is probably my biggest flaw with this film from a character perspective. Going on to the way the film looks and the cinematography, and we've got some really, really cool other things to discuss visually in the movie. The movie looks great, I'll give it that. The camera work, the cinematography is fantastic. His suit and everything looks great. I will say that the suit does look like it's gone through a bit of an animation render as well on it. While it does look good, it does sometimes look like a bit of a cutscene from an Insomniac video game at times. That said though, I would much rather that, and for them to do what they did in this film with the swinging scenes, than for us to not have them at all. Because it is so good to see Spider-Man swinging around again. And they've brought back Peter swinging in Brand New Day. I'm really grateful that we do get an extended swing scene. Thank God it only took them long enough to finally put one back into a Spider-Man movie. Felt like they forgot a little bit. It is semi-reminiscent of Andrew Garfield's swinging scenes in the Amazing Spider-Man films. So massive props for the team for adding one of those in. Even though it does look a little bit digitally rendered, it doesn't really matter because I would much rather have it in the movie than not in the movie. So that's a thumbs up for this film. In terms of pacing and everything, I think the film is a really fun time. I definitely enjoyed the first half of Brand New Day more than the second. I think the first half focuses more on the street level aspect of Spider-Man. It's great that they brought that back. Obviously, No Way Home was a very big step out of the comfort zone of what we've seen from any Spider-Man film ever. So it was fantastic that they brought back the street level stuff in this one. They did a great job of conveying that in the first half of the movie. I really like as well the fact that Spider-Man goes up and interacts with a lot of different villains. As I said, a lot of them are fairly brief. However, some of them are a little bit more than brief. For example, like we get Scorpion, which is awesome to see him. It is very well deserved to see Scorpion finally suit up in this movie. So I'm really stoked about that. I just wish we got a little more, but it is great to see him going around getting street level targeted criminals, locking them up, etc. So props to the movie for bringing that back, as well as those other things that I did mention before. So I'm gonna give a thumbs up in that regard. My main issue with the movie is just the second half of the movie. I don't think backs up the first. And I said this in the pre-review, my biggest fear with Spider-Man Brand New Day is that similarly to Spider-Man Homecoming and other MCU films, Spider-Man Far From Home, there's two movies living in this movie. There's the Peter Parker story and the Spider-Man story, and then there's the MCU story that they're wanting to tell. Now, like I said, they do a fairly good job of organically incorporating the Peter Parker Spider-Man story into the MCU story in the movie. So I'm not gonna try to say they didn't do a decent job at that, because they definitely tried. And a lot of what they bring in does feel organic. Like the Hand, like I said, Punisher, Hulk, a lot of this stuff does feel organic to the story. So props for that. It just feels like in the second half, maybe even just the back third, the last act, it does stray away from Spider-Man too much for me. It's not that Spider-Man's not featured. It's not that Spider-Man's themes aren't there. It's not that the characters and the storyline that we've had for the last hour and a half doesn't conclude satisfyingly. It's just, I feel like there's another element in this movie that becomes too prominent, and the Spider-Man stuff, unfortunately, slightly gets left behind. That's my main problem with this. It's not a big thing. I'm not saying that they didn't do a decent job. I am saying, though, that I would have preferred it if we continued with the organic Peter Parker story throughout the entirety of the film, rather than slightly switching things up for a third act climax. Overall, though, I'm going to conclude the spoiler-free section of the Spider-Man Brand New Day review by saying Spider-Man Brand New Day is definitely a fun time. I enjoyed myself. I will watch this movie again. I will say the MCU has probably set the bar not the highest with their content lately, so it is nice to have Brand New Day come in and set the bar back at a reasonable, watchable, and enjoyable level for, I think, most people, even those who are cynical and critical of the universe at the moment. So I'd be surprised if you didn't have a fun time watching Brand New Day. It's got a lot of elements I like. A lot of the characters do feel organic and meshed in. There's a good Peter Parker story in here with some hard-hitting emotional moments. I do just think that it does lose its way a little bit in the last act, but I don't think that it's enough to compromise the movie as a whole. I'm happy to give Spider-Man Brand New Day a 7 out of 10 for a fun time, and if they do any more Spider-Man related movies, I'd be keen to give them a watch. Alright, so that concludes the spoiler-free section of my Spider-Man Brand New Day review, but as promised, I am going to get into some spoilers now, because I do want to talk about what's going on in that final climax as a part of my review. So if you haven't seen Brand New Day yet, or you're looking forward to seeing Brand New Day, feel free to come on back here after you've seen it to listen to the back portion of this review, or feel free to go along with your day as is. Thank you for watching regardless. I am now going to get into spoilers, so please click off if you haven't seen the film and do want to. Alright, so getting into the back half to third of the film, we have Sadie Sink's character, who is revealed as the villain of the film in Jean Grey. Now, I have to give Sony a little bit of flack for this, because I don't know what was a worse kept secret. Sadie Sink as Jean Grey, or Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire coming back in Spider-Man No Way Home. And I'm actually going to give it to Sadie Sink as Jean Grey being the worst kept secret. Apart from the fact that Steve Lacy did announce it on the red carpet, this was reported on at the end of 2024. So once again, I don't know how they let insiders have this knowledge. What is that? 18 months before this movie actually comes out. But they were doing something wrong if it got out that early. Regardless of this, I do think that this character probably, while I can understand why they're introducing Jean Grey into the franchise at this point, obviously the X-Men are going to feature heavily in Avengers Doomsday. We know this from the trailer and from casting and plot leaks and everything. However, I do think that Sadie Sink being the overarching villain, while it is a cool twist, I will give them that, it is a cool twist. And I'm glad that I didn't watch trailers or anything for Spider-Man Brand New Day prior. I kept away from marketing and all that. Even I still knew this before, even with keeping away from trailers and everything. It's a cool twist, and I do respect them for having the balls to do it. However, I just think that it becomes too much focused on a Sadie Sink, Jean Grey story, rather than Peter Parker in the last third. In a Spider-Man movie, I want the Spider-Man plot to be the A plot throughout the whole thing. I'm fine if they introduce other characters and let them do their thing, but I don't want their story to overtake Peter Parker. So there's a good example in Spider-Man Brand New Day. We get, once again, Frank Castle and his family. We get a scene with MJ and Punisher and Spider-Man all in the one room, and Frank's basically telling Zendaya, MJ, you don't know anything about my story, etc. This is clearly hinting at Frank's trauma with his family. Okay? However, it's not overtaking the Peter Parker and MJ side of this story in their relationship is bruised. Peter is on the ropes and he doesn't know how to recover with MJ after what's happened in the last movie. So that's still the central plot. I like Jean Grey's motivation in this movie in trying to find her sister. It does make her come across as more sympathetic, which is obviously the idea. I just don't like how it overtakes Peter Parker's story in the last third in a Spider-Man movie. Once again, understand why Marvel did it. Obviously, X-Men coming up. It's great to see Jean Grey in the MCU. It is. It really is. It's great to see the X-Men coming in. However, I'm just not sold on the fact that her story should come in front of Peter Parker's in the last third. That's all. Apart from that, though, I think that she's fine. I do like how we're getting a younger Jean Grey. The trauma that she's obviously had with her sister here will probably be re-explored if and when she does become Phoenix later down the line. So it's cool to see that prop up here as some childhood trauma for her. And it was cool to see a younger version of Jean Grey as well, which they can flesh out and explore. So I did like that part. Sadie Sink's performance is fine, and she's definitely a menacing threat in the movie. The only other thing which I really want to touch on from the film would be, at the end we do have obviously the fake out, if you've seen it, with the Punisher shooting Spider-Man. Spider-Man goes down, loses a lot of blood, and then he goes to hospital and recovers really quickly. I wasn't a fan of this scene either. The reason why is just because it feels like a really cheap cop-out. I don't like movies that do cheap fake-outs that ultimately don't mean anything and are played up for a laugh in the end, and then ultimately show that the movie can't commit to an emotional moment. I can understand why they did it in the movie to show that people do support Spider-Man at the end. However, ultimately, it wasn't really a case of the public in Spider-Man Brand New Day not supporting him throughout the movie. It's not like a case where J. Jonah Jameson was slandering him and the public's against Spider-Man. So I don't know why that scene needed to happen, and I don't like the fact that they just did a fake out to shock the audience for a minute or two, and then have Spider-Man be fine and get it played up for laughs with the Punisher putting on the Spider-Man mask, which, yes, is funny, and yes, it is something which Frank Castle would probably do. However, I don't think that it just worked thematically at the end of this movie. We've got this big emotional scene with Jean Grey. Jean Grey ends up coming to her senses in the end and doing the right thing. And then we just have Spider-Man get shot, lose a lot of blood, and then, yeah, fake out, emotional moment, and he's fine a minute later. Peter Parker did lose a lot of blood when he got shot there, and I don't really buy the fact he would have recovered that quickly either. Understand he's got the healing, which is accelerated with the arachnid spider abilities. However, I just didn't like how they didn't commit to an emotional moment and put it in there. If you're going to put something like that in there, we've got the precedent with Aunt May getting shot in the movie before, showing that they're not afraid to do it. So why is this scene here? And if this scene is going to happen, can we please actually have an emotional moment and not get it played up for laughs a minute later? It just felt cheap to me. That's probably my only other main criticism with the movie. But like I said, overall, it's a fun time. I'm just nitpicking things in the third act now. Thank you guys so much for watching the review. I really appreciate it. I've got more content coming on the way shortly, and excited to have a look at what else is coming out in 2026. Whether you stay to the end or cut it after the spoiler-free review, thank you for checking this out. Please like the video if you enjoyed. Hit that subscribe button for more content soon. I'll catch you in the next one. Have a great day.